Today, we're tackling a massively important topic, one that literally bridges the gap between company profits and manager behavior. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the ROI dark side. Second, the residual income formula. Third, achieving goal congruence. Fourth, we'll compare ROI and RI side by side. And fifth, we'll wrap up with some crucial CMA exam strategy.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the ROI dark side.
Okay, let's dive into this. You've probably just wrapped up learning all about return on investment, or ROI. And look, it's a fantastic tool. It's used everywhere, and it's basically a staple of corporate finance. But it's got a flaw, a pretty significant one actually, that can seriously harm a company's overall growth. So if ROI is this universal gold standard, why on earth does the CMA syllabus insist we learn an entirely different metric? Well, the answer really boils down to human nature. You see, when you tie a manager's bonus strictly to their ROI percentage, you kind of inadvertently create this environment where they might start acting a little selfishly, prioritizing their own shiny metrics over the company's best interests.
Think of this as the ROI hangover. It's called suboptimization. Imagine I'm circling this big, scary word in red marker on a whiteboard right now. Suboptimization happens when a manager looks at a perfectly good, highly profitable project, a project that would absolutely make the company richer, and they just say, no. Why? Because bringing on that new project might drag down their own personal sky-high ROI average. So they optimize their own bonus, but they suboptimize the company. It's a huge problem.
Moving right along to Section 2, the residual income formula. Now, as your coach, I really need you to know that this formula is a very frequent guest on the CMA exam. To fix that selfish behavior we just talked about, we need a new metric. We need residual income. You've got to burn this one into your memory. Residual income equals operating income minus the product of the target rate of return multiplied by average invested capital. Now, unlike ROI, which just spits out a percentage, residual income gives you absolute dollars. It asks a remarkably simple question. Hey, after we pay for the cost of the capital we borrowed to run this division, are there actual physical dollars left over?
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we can break down that complex second half of the formula into simple, everyday logic. That calculation, target rate of return multiplied by invested capital, well, officially that's called the imputed interest charge. But between you and me, I just like to call it the cost of your tools. It simply represents the absolute minimum dollar amount the company expects you to earn just to justify the assets they've handed over to you to manage.
So the crucial point is really how you interpret the final dollar amount this formula spits out. If your residual income is positive, boom, congratulations. You haven't just paid for the cost of your tools, you've actually generated extra wealth. You've exceeded expectations. If it's exactly zero, well, you've perfectly met the minimum requirements. Nothing more, nothing less. But if it's negative, that means you haven't earned enough to cover those imputed costs, even if your traditional operating income is technically showing a profit.
Which brings us to Section 3, achieving goal congruence.
So, why do modern companies absolutely love this metric? Simply put, because it acts as a behavioral fix. Let's run through a theoretical scenario together. Picture a company. The top executives at headquarters have sat down and determined that their target rate of return, their absolute minimum acceptable hurdle for any investment, is 10%.
Now, a manager within that company stumbles upon a brand new project. After crunching all the numbers, this project promises to earn a very healthy 12% return. I mean, it's clearly a winner for the company, right? It earns 12%, and the company only requires 10%. Easy yes. But there's a catch. This specific manager is an absolute rock star, and their current personal ROI for their division is sitting way up at 18%. Now see what happens here. Under the old ROI system, a rockstar manager actually rejects the 12% project. Why? Because blending a 12% return into their 18% division mathematically drags their average down, which directly threatens their year-end bonus. But under the residual income system, the whole perspective shifts to absolute dollars. The manager looks at it and sees that the 12% project brings in more money than the 10% cost charge. Taking the project will actually add more raw dollars to their total residual income pile. So under RI, the manager happily says yes.
And this brilliantly illustrates a highly testable concept for your exam, goal congruence. By simply switching the measurement from percentages over to absolute leftover dollars, the manager is finally financially incentivized to do exactly what the company wants them to do, which is accept all profitable projects. The manager gets a bigger bonus pile, the company gets profitable growth, and suddenly everybody is rowing in the exact same direction.
All right, let's move into Section 4,
comparing ROI and RI.
We really need to build you a direct cheat sheet here, because let me tell you, the CMA exam absolutely loves asking you to compare and contrast these two metrics. Let's walk through this side by side. First up, the measurement unit. ROI is always a percentage, while RI is absolute dollars. What's the main advantage of ROI? Flexibility, for sure. Because it's a percentage, you can effortlessly compare a tiny $1 million division against a massive billion-dollar division. It's basically making apples to oranges super easy. Now, RI's main advantage, as we just saw, is that it promotes goal congruence. But let's look at the downsides. As we know, ROI can lead to managers rejecting perfectly good projects. RI, on the other hand, is heavily biased toward larger divisions. I mean, it's really hard to compare a massive division's leftover dollars to a tiny division's leftover dollars simply because the big division just has more assets to generate cash with in the first place.
Let's move on and see how this builds into Section 5, CMA Exam Strategy. It's one thing to understand the theory, but I want you getting these questions right quickly and efficiently on test day. So let's put on our test prep coach hats for a second. Here are your rapid-fire tips for surviving any investment center performance question. First, find the hurdle. The exam won't always kindly call it the target rate. Nope, be on the lookout for terms like cost of capital or WACC. That's weighted average cost of capital. That is your multiplier. Second, always use averages. Just like with ROI, if the problem gives you beginning and ending assets, you've got to average them out before multiplying. And finally, memorize the decision rule. If a project's return percentage is strictly higher than the target rate percentage, residual income will absolutely always increase. No complex math required.
All right, you are now fully equipped to handle residual income like an absolute pro. But before we part ways today, I want to leave you with this tricky little scenario to really test your critical thinking. Imagine a company suddenly decides to increase its target rate of return from 10% up to 12%. What happens to a division's residual income, assuming their operating income stays exactly the same? Think about how that cost of tools just got quite a bit more expensive and what that ultimately does to the leftover dollars. I want you to really ponder that as you continue your studies. Keep up this incredible focus, trust in the structured process we're using, and remember, you are one step closer to putting those 3 letters, CMA, right after your name. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.